Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Christianly. This is your host, Brad Andrews. Hey, again, thanks for joining us for this week's edition of Christianly. Christianly exists to cultivate holy courage in you, and we do that by looking at issues in our culture through a biblical lens so that you grow in your confidence to stand firm on God's truth and His Word. Now, our typical routine is to do a couple of shorter commentaries that are sandwiched around a real deep dive into another issue. But this week, we're going to actually do something we did a few weeks ago when we took a deep dive into the Jaden Ivey story. We're going to take all of our time today and go into the deep end on just one issue, and that issue will make sense as we go through this. So let's just get started. Here's issue number one. If you want to see the cost of our cultural experiments, you don't have to read a study. You can just watch a baby cry. Because here in the West, children are paying the price for what adults insist on calling love, and we need to talk about it.
Who do you want, Dada or Pop?
Mama.
No, Mama. Do you want Dada or Pop? Who do you want, Dada or Pop? No. Do you want Dada or you want Pop? No way, Jose. I think. Oh. There is no Mama. I'm so sorry. You have Dada and Pop. You have Pop.
Two choices.
No Mama. No Mama. Dada or Pop? But no.
What you just heard was a video that circulated online a few weeks ago featuring Nashvillians Shane McAnally, who is a four-time Grammy award-winning country music songwriter, producer, and publisher, and his husband, Michael Baum. And if you were only listening to the podcast, not actually seeing the visuals, what's happening is Baum is holding their 6-month-old son named Texan, who was born via commercial surrogacy back in October of 2025. You may have heard that the child babbles what sounds like mama. I actually think it is mama, and grows visibly distressed and cries when the men laugh. One responds, "No mama, there is no mama. I'm so sorry. You have Dada and Pop." The baby's distress continues. In response, it pouts, it tears up, but they keep joking. It really is a sick video. I'll go even further. I actually think it's sadistic. I remember when I was watching it, I thought, how sad is this? But this is a window into a system called surrogacy. And more specifically, what we're going to talk about today, gay surrogacy. And by that I mean the commodification of children to supply gay parents with something they cannot create on their own. Surrogacy in general is the intentional engineering of motherlessness. But in this case, you can see the appeal to gay men in particular because in surrogacy, the arrangement requires an egg donor and a gestational carrier. Biology is not needed. It's being outsourced. Now, critics have been warning for years that commercial surrogacy commodifies both women and children. Payments to surrogates in the United States commonly range from $50,000 to over $100,000. Egg retrieval is compensated typically on site on the day of retrieval. And what we've been told about all of this was that this is a compassionate thing to do. It helps infertile couples, that is surrogacy in general. But the sleight of hand is this: it is increasingly becoming a medical intervention repurposed to manufacture a family for those who can't have them, not because of their infertility, but because of their innate God-given biology. Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel Brave New World wrote all the way back in 1932 the idea of hatcheries and conditioning centers in a world where mother and father were a bygone memory. What was once considered futuristic fiction is now a business model with branding. But where did this begin? Well, I think first we need to go back to when the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage through Obergefell back in 2015, just over 10 years ago. It elevated same-sex unions in the name of non-discrimination. In other words, what it did is it helped legally streamline the process of what we're talking about today, child acquisition, on the idea of equality. And then to restrict that would be to equal bigotry. And the slippery slope should have been obvious 10 years ago, but if you're willing to pretend that two men now can be married, there's no reason to object to the equal farce of two men pretending to be parents. See, Obergefell essentially redefined God's design of the family. And if marriage is no longer ordered towards procreation, then children can now just be accessories rather than fruit. And once that shift was made legally, it was inevitable for the demand to follow. And where demand goes, markets always rise to meet it. There have also been institutional concessions, other ones that have come because of Obergefell as well. Back in 2021, Bethany Christian Services, the largest Christian adoption and foster agency in the United States, announced that it would allow placement of children with same-sex couples. The president of that organization framed it as an all-hands-on-deck approach. What the president of that company didn't tell you was that after a 2019 legal ruling tied government funding to compliance, that agency chose scale over spine. This was another implication, I think, again, of Obergefell. But then there is the system itself, particularly in the West, that has become a problem. If you look at this issue across the world, America is actually the Wild West of reproductive technology, whether you're talking about IVF or egg selling, sperm donation, and then what we're talking about today, surrogacy. It really operates with minimal regulation here. One woman sells her eggs, another rents her womb, and the child is separated from both. And the process is not only transactional, it is selective. And here's what I mean by that. Millions of embryos are created through IVF, and they're screened for traits and abnormalities. Many of them are discarded while others are frozen indefinitely. And it's actually a very small percentage that are brought to term. This is actually eugenics of the highest order. It just happens to have a nice website with a smiling nurse. The contracts involved in these transactions also reveal that there is a different moral center in what is actually going on. For example, if a fetus is deemed abnormal, the intended parents can decide whether to abort it or not. And if the surrogate refuses, she is considered in breach and must repay compensation. In other words, the buyer can demand the destruction of the product that they've requested if it fails quality control, even late in pregnancy. And so we arrive at the scene in our video today where a baby cries for mama, and two men laugh because they have successfully removed her from the equation. The tragedy is not that the child is mistaken, it's that the adults are. And now for our deep dive, issue number 2. If you want to understand where our culture is headed, watch what it does with its children, because nothing exposes our idols faster than how we treat the most vulnerable among us.
In the surrogacy contract, it's just normal to have abortion clauses. So the commissioning parents have the choice, if they wish, to demand an abortion to the surrogate. So there was this case where a surrogate mother was pregnant. She was in her 3rd trimester. And the baby, after the ultrasound, was found missing 2 fingers. And the commissioning parents did not want a child missing 2 fingers. So they asked the surrogate mother to perform an abortion. She was in her 3rd trimester, I have to say, full-grown baby. Indeed. And so she refused. She wanted to keep the baby. She refused. She said no. Unfortunately, she received a letter from lawyers of the commissioning parents saying that the contract had to be enforced and that she had to get a abortion or else she would not receive the money. And in plus of that, she would be sued. So she was forced to abort this baby just because he was missing 2 fingers.
In the video that you just heard, Olivia Morel, herself born via surrogacy, but now an advocate to abolish it, recounts a United States case where a 3rd trimester surrogate was contractually pressured via a lawsuit threat to abort a fetus missing 2 fingers at the commissioning parent's demand. We just talked about that, right? Just a small window, again, into the cold machinery of the general surrogacy system. So if you want to understand a system, you have to look at the different roles in that system. Who pays, who provides, who profits, and who pays the price. So let's start with, first, the intended parents, in particular in gay surrogacy. In the case we're looking at today with McAnally and Baum, we have 2 men. Now, the cultural script says they have a right to parenthood. One of the arguments that is being made for this idea comes from a place like the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. And they have recently updated their definition of what infertility means to include gay men and women. But this is what it means, that they can't achieve a pregnancy due to their sexuality. It's not that they actually are infertile, but because of their chosen sexual lifestyle, they can now be considered infertile. Now, ASRM's policies aren't law, but the hope for many is that their words make their way into insurance companies and employee benefits language. And I don't want you to miss the sleight of hand here. It is now discriminatory that men can't procreate with other men. It's not enough to redefine marriage anymore. We must redefine a medical condition so that same-sex couples like McAnally and Baum can gain subsidized access to other people's children. And the reason that this is even being considered is because God's design is unmoved. 2 men cannot create a child, and that is not discrimination. That is biology. The irony is actually really sharp. Those who reject the natural structure of procreation still seek its fruit. They want the child without the form that produces that same child. So they recreate the process artificially. But in doing so, they reveal what they already know. The design that they have rejected is the design that they actually need. Now, there is a safety dimension that is often ignored when it comes to the intended parents as well. Data consistently shows that the most dangerous person to a child is an unrelated, I repeat, unrelated adult male in the home. Surrogacy in general guarantees that at least one parent is unrelated to the child, right? But in same-sex male households, both are removed. Now, that does not mean every case results in harm. It just means that the structure itself elevates risk. There is another alarming safety element in the general surrogacy system that, by implication, is true for same-sex couples as well. Advocate Katie Faust has pointed this out. The fertility industry as a whole really requires very little tracking or follow-up or vetting. That is not the case for something like adoption agencies. They have to screen, they have to monitor, they have to do background checks, but for some reason the fertility market does not. So children born through surrogacy often disappear from any kind of real oversight. We don't know where they go. Many times we do not know what happens to them. And friends, that's chilling to me. But all of this exposes a vulnerability. When a system lowers barriers, removes scrutiny, guess who notices? Predators. Now consider next the women who are the surrogates. We are told that the surrogate is not really the mother. She's just a carrier. And that the future parents are really the parents. But that is a carefully crafted half-truth. See, the industry splits motherhood really into 2 parts, the surrogacy industry. Part 1 is that the woman provides the egg, and then the other carries the child, and each one is told that she's not really the mother. But the goal here is psychological distance. In other words, if no one feels like the mother, maybe no one will feel the loss. But that just isn't true. If the egg donor gives half of the child's DNA, then inevitably identity flows from that. And then the one who carries the baby to full term provides the environment of development. The child will know her voice, her heartbeat, because attachment begins before birth. Again, this is biology. Now, some women enter surrogacy out of financial pressure, things like student loans or family needs, limited options. And that makes them both a participant and a victim. And that is when the system steps in and actually exploits their vulnerability, while at the same time requiring their consent. And then there are the medical risks for the mother. A recent large-scale research project covered over 800,000 births and showed that surrogacy carries higher rates of things like severe complications, preeclampsia, sepsis, things like postpartum hemorrhage. But there are also increased risks of new onset mental illness as well for the surrogate. See, contracts strip the woman of decision-making power. In some jurisdictions, she can be compelled to even abort at the request of the intended parents or face financial penalties, as we talked about before. Now, let's talk about the men who sell their side of the fertilization process in this. He is often invisible in this conversation, but let's be honest, he is participating in the same fragmentation. He is fathering children he will never know. In essence, he is contributing to a system where if one day that child wanted to find him, what would he discover? Likely nothing more than a resume and a contract. Friends, that is not how Scripture treats fatherhood. To scatter one seed without the responsibility that goes along with that, I believe, is shameful. But finally, we have the children. They are the only parties who did not choose any of this, and yet they bear many of the consequences. Consider the simple word mama that you heard that little boy say in the video earlier. Across all languages and cultures, and even centuries, that sound emerges early in an infant's development. It is often tied to nursing and to comfort in the presence of a mother, and that is not by accident. It actually reflects design. The child in the video we heard earlier was not performing for the camera. He was expressing something biological. He had spent 9 months hearing a voice, feeling a heartbeat, receiving life through his mother. And then at birth, that body was removed. The bond was severed. And then this new environment did not match the old memory. And so naturally, distress followed. Some have said about that little boy in the video that he didn't understand what he was saying. But infants understand all they need to know that when that seeking is denied, something is wrong. Dr. Paul Sullins, who is the research associate professor at the Catholic University of America, it's a place where he taught sociology for over 20 years before retiring about a decade ago. He recently reanalyzed a widely cited data set regarding children in same-sex households. And he found that there were some pretty significant errors in that study. So as he reanalyzed it, what he found was that children in same-sex households actually showed higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety and behavioral issues. And in some cases, reported child sexual abuse rose dramatically within the subset that he studied. Other studies have shown that children in same-sex households are less likely to make normal progress through things like school, and they end up experiencing higher emotional difficulties. Across all the disciplines, a consistent pattern is coming out. Children do best when raised by their married mother and father in a low-conflict home. That means that mothers and fathers are not interchangeable. When you remove at least one of these elements in a same-sex household, the child loses a mother or a father. In gay surrogacy, both biological parents are absent. In all of this, a child's identity for him or her becomes a puzzle. Attachment gets very complicated, and in the end, the system asks the child to absorb the cost of adult choices. We see in gay surrogacy something that is true in other blots in our society, like abortion and divorce culture, and it's this: children are often the innocent people in social experiments. Over and over again, it is adults who are putting their desires over and above the rights and needs of children. And for us as Christians, we just cannot accept this. The God who knit children together in the womb also commands us to protect them once they are born. To reorder family around adults' desires is to defy both creation and command. So we must speak up and we must speak out, because if we won't contend for children, who will? We must stand where Scripture stands. Children are not commodities to be ordered and engineered and then delivered. They are image bearers to be protected and seen as the blessings that they are. So where is this all headed? In many ways, we are already there, right? It's a culture where technology doesn't just assist life, but replaces its meaning by turning people into dehumanized exports. So this is about more than just ethics. It's actually about our souls.
Quick recap, we're having 2 babies. We bought 40 frozen eggs from our egg donor. 28 of those eggs survived the thawing process and then were fertilized. 12 of those fertilized eggs did not develop into usable embryos. So that makes 16 embryos that were sent to PGT testing. And we just got in those PGT testing results. Starting with Joshua's side, his one embryo that was rated good to average came back as chaotic, which checks out. That one is no longer usable. This one, which was originally graded good, came back aneuploid. Chromosome 13 only had 1 in the pair. On my side, the one that was originally graded as bad indeed came back aneuploid. Its chromosome 13 also only had 1 in the pair. This one, which was originally graded as good, came back with no DNA detected, so that's no longer usable. This one, too, which was also originally graded as good, came back aneuploid. Chromosome number 4 only had 1 in the pair. Lastly, this one, which was originally graded good to average, came back as high mosaic. Chromosome number 2 had 3 when it was supposed to have 2. All in all, we're so happy that we decided to purchase as many frozen eggs as we could, 40, because that leaves us with these 10 embryos for 2 babies. And we're told that the majority of journeys take 2 to 3 transfers to get pregnant. We've decided which embryo on both sides that we want to transfer to our 2 surrogates. We'll keep you updated as we do the transfers and as we find out whether or not we're pregnant, and continue to be transparent of how many transfers it takes. But we're not going to share the sex of both babies until we're officially pregnant, just like any other expecting parents would. Thanks for following along, and we're excited to keep you updated.
What you just heard was a man named Matt Tolbert revealing that he and his gay partner purchased 40 frozen eggs from an egg donor to use with a surrogate and fertilized them to create embryos, and then used pre-implantation genetic testing, also known as PGT, to select viable ones for transfer to 2 different surrogates in Mexico. In 2023, there was a report from the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology that found between 2014 and 2020, 32% of U.S. surrogacy pregnancies were for buyers outside of the country. 42% of those buyers were men of Asian descent, many from China. In other words, America has become a global marketplace for the womb. A surrogacy agency that operates across the United States called Just Life is literally offering a commercial warranty on the baby that you purchase by renting someone's womb if your baby dies within the first 2 years of their life. You can go through the process of surrogacy again after that if you want. If you trace a line forward from just those 3 examples, the destination, if not where we already are, is not hard to see. It is a world where human life is industrialized. It's like an assembly line logic applied to human life. And if you dig down deep, the philosophical engine that is behind all of this is what is called transhumanism. If the body is just hardware, then reproduction is just manufacturing. And manufacturing can be optimized. There is also a deep relational cost in all of this. We said earlier that a child produced through this kind of system begins life without the ordinary bonds that anchor its identity. But I want to press this further. If you multiply that across generations and you create a population detached from the basic structures that form trust and belonging, what you have is something that affects everything: marriages, friendships, community, even worship. See, the scriptures present a very different vision for us. Human beings are not products. They are image bearers. They are not assembled. They are formed. You knit me together in my mother's womb, the psalmist says. Optimization has a cost because it strips away something called givenness. When we move from the knitting of God to the manufacturing of man, we do more than change methods. we change meaning. And the result is a two-tier humanity, those who are designed and those who are not, those who meet the standard and those who fall short. The scriptures also speak to something else. For those who treat desire as destiny, to those who say, if I want something deeply enough, then I'm owed it. But scripture does not agree with those ideas. James actually warns that desire, when it conceives, gives birth to sin. I think the double meaning is rich there. So the call, Christian, then, is not for minor reform. We must call for moral clarity. Surrogacy, in all of its forms, asks a child to bear a loss so that adults can fulfill a desire, and that inversion cannot be made righteous by better contracts or kinder language. It is disordered at the root. 2 Timothy 3 warns of a time when people will be lovers of self without natural affection. That phrase, without natural affection, should land hard, and we are seeing that in today's story. We must affirm that children are gifts, not goods. We must insist that mothers and fathers are not interchangeable. We must protect the vulnerable even when it may cost us cultural approval. See, love does not require us to call evil good. It requires us to name reality and point to a better way. And really, a better way is not complicated. It's a man and a woman joined in marriage, receiving children as the Lord gives. Now that will sound strange to many. It will likely sound outdated to many. It will be called things like narrow. But narrow is exactly what Jesus said the road would be that leads to life. So we don't need to apologize for that. We just need to proclaim it, because God's design is not only right, it's good. And in the end, it is the only path that protects children, that honors creation, and gives glory to the one who made us. Hey, thanks again for joining us. If you would, take a second to respond on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. We're on places like YouTube, where you can like the video and subscribe. Hit the notification bell there so you don't miss any future episodes. We're on Apple and Spotify podcasts as well. Be sure to follow us there if you listen to this podcast there, and that is thunder in the background. There is a storm coming through here. And find us on social media as well. Share this episode there. Jump into the conversation. And as we always say here, if you're in the Tulsa area or you're just passing through, we'd love to have you hang out and meet you. I'm the lead pastor at a church here called Cross and Crown. We meet at 10:30 for worship in the urban core of Tulsa at 11th and Yale. We'd love to have you. We meet at Will Rogers Church in their gymnasium for worship during that time. And remember, don't just listen, speak and lead. Share the light. And remember that there isn't a corner of this world that doesn't belong to the King.